Good evening. We are back and better than ever. I want to thank you. It's so great to see so many friends live and in person. And we want to have Christine start off the show. Remember, wit, wisdom, and endearing bloopers are in your future. So, say a word or two.
Oh, Shelby. So we're unscripted. You may not have put that together, but we are an awesome team, me and Shelby Coffey. And I first have to thank Shelby for being our host. Shelby is an esteemed journalist with a remarkable history. Yes, Shelby, please.
I'm paying cash money. There won't even be a check for that, this entire table.
No, I mean
Thank
that,
you.
and we're lucky to have, we're more than lucky to have you. You have been an amazing journalist in the last few decades of work, including work at the Washington Post, CNN, the LA Times as editor. I know your story.
You can't say that with Wolf Blitzer in the house. Wolf Blitzer, our own latter-day Walter
would
Cronkite.
agree with me that you're an outstanding journalist, and we're very fortunate to. And your work at the museum, and I think we can all agree the First Amendment is a priority for our country and our democracy, and Shelby's caretaking of that has been remarkable.
Now, thank you. Now more than ever, that First Amendment.
Yes, indeed, and we will go forward from here. So, you're staying with me. Don't you leave me.
Separation anxiety left over.
100%, 100%. I want to first thank all of you for coming tonight. Boy, it's been since 2019. Keystone's a family. We're family and friends, and the generous support of all of you attending and sponsoring and commitment to this organization, it allows us to do our work. We had a terrific board meeting today and talked about how important this event is to Keystone. It's with the dollars raised, it's our only fundraising event. It's with the dollars raised that we are able to invest in seeking out projects, the work that Keystone does best, bridging the divide around the intersection of policy and politics so that we can focus on outcomes that are sustainable and lasting over time. And we couldn't do that without all of you. So I want to thank everyone here. Please, give yourself a
There we
please.
go. Well deserved.
Well deserved indeed. And I have to recognize some of our presenting sponsors who have stepped up in a way that's been remarkable for this evening's event. And aren't you glad we're here together? As we mentioned, everybody looks great. They haven't aged a day. I think you and I have gotten younger.
It's a plus. It's a net plus.
I wish I'd gotten thinner, but for sure younger.
She looks so thin. Come on,
no,
around.
It's all right. I love
all that exercise at altitude.
I just breathe
Colorado.
at altitude. That's the exercise. So I want to thank our presenting sponsors, Denton's, Dow, FedEx, who's been a remarkable partner, Huntington Bankshares Fund. I also have to thank our Keystone team who has made this possible. Judy O'Brien. Judy, where are you?
Right
Yay,
there.
Judy.
Right there.
Brandy Siderhoud. Where's Brandy? Brandy just got hired on, and we threw her into the deep end, and she keeps swimming, and we're so grateful. And always Marcus Chavez, our comms director, who makes sure, although he doesn't like this part when we just talk with each other, that makes him nervous. But we'll be all right. We'll be good, right?
We'll be controlled.
And the Defer Collaborative for all their work putting this event together. We're grateful for everyone. We're grateful to begin this evening. And with that, I'm turning it to our host, the esteemed Shelby Coffey.
So, before we stay with me.
We're together.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are honored to introduce Paula Gold Williams, who is the chair of the Keystone Policy Center Board of Trustees.
You know, we really like Paula.
We like Paula,
think
and
Paula's
she's coming.
great.
She's coming right up here.
Paula is a remarkable
She's going to do a personal welcome.
She's our person, and we think she's fabulous.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yes.
All right.
So you got a word or two. Madam, there you are.
All right. So they had a team, and they worked together. I'm all by myself, so just bear with me here. So I am best when I'm able to know that I'm in conversation. I have been given a ton of things to say tonight, and so I will read, but my introduction really is welcoming all of you to this event. It hasn't made any sense. I think we had our energy board meeting yesterday, which was wonderful. We had our policy board meeting today. I said we've been gone away from getting together for like a COVID minute, which really means 2 years plus. And we did all the hybrid stuff. We did all the trying to make things work. And I kind of like it. I like sometimes seeing everybody's faces in a box and see how you glow. But at the same time, it has been just amazing to know that we're back together again in one place of like mind, missing each other, and having the ability to celebrate. Having the ability to think about what's really important. What Keystone does best is think about making change in a meaningful way through collaboration and that interchange. And they've even perfected being able to do it remotely. But overall, they're looking at what we can do to make policy changes. What can we do to make steps forward? We've all seen the division. We've all seen differences of opinion. How are we going to get to decarbonization? How are we going to, what technology is going to win out? And we all know it's all of the above and it's complicated and we don't even have all the tools and resources that we need to do it. But even more so, what we need is we need collaboration and the willingness of everybody to put their thoughts together to come out with meaningful steps to move forward. I am blessed. I mean, you saw before the dinner started, we had the reel running, and I am blessed because a gentleman by the name of Bob Craig thought that it was important back then to make meaningful policy and to find ways to make a whole nation move forward. And he created a seed in Keystone. I never got the privilege and the honor to know him personally. However, there are many people here who knew him well and have taught me a lot about what it means to be collaborative, to be a friend, to be able to work across an aisle and put your hand out and open your mind up to make things happen. That work has been going on. We'll be approaching a 50-year landmark in the next couple of years. And we'll be hitting a 30-year landmark shortly for the dinner. So all of that is really important, and I'm really glad that we can get together to make sure that we keep the legacy going, that we celebrate our leaders tonight who are doing wonderful things in all walks of making sure that conversation is happening. So with that, I want to thank you, all the sponsors, those of you who sponsored tables, those of you who invited your friends, those friends who I have not seen for a long time, and all of you getting together and choosing to be here tonight. Under the spotlights, I'm sweating. But really important stuff. Now, I've got a couple of important things I need to make sure I don't mess up, though. We are going to celebrate, we're going to have the conversations, and you're going to see 3 videos tonight. And I think sometimes when you can see the videos, you can get a real sense of the content of what's working. Importantly, last year we announced that in the fall that we were going to work on a project, and I'm glad to announce we completed our first successful year. And it was the first ever charter school on a Indian reservation, the Ute Mountain Ute Reservation in Colorado. And it is run by tribal and community leaders. And I've really had a wonderful ability to learn a bit more about this program. You'll hear more tonight. What's really important is they're really trying to make sure that culturally, the students in their community get a sense of who they are, what their history is, and really begin to build upon the future. And I think it's a wonderful video that we'll be able to share, and you'll see that shortly. Some other work that we've done recently, We have a project where we have a U.S.-based conservation and consumer and non-governmental organizations collaboration. And we developed some principles for responsible governance associated with gene editing in agriculture and the environment. We've also looked at the effects, and I know we've talked about this nationally, the effects of COVID on education. And there's so much concern as well, there should be. And our team has really been looking at what have been those impacts. And they have been working specifically in Colorado to create a roadmap of what we can do to go ahead and mend those gaps and make sure that we're making sure our students have a way to move forward. You know, kind of had a little update from Christine. We are fortunate to have her as our CEO. Again, she's been rich in our organization. She's helped make sure that the board members, both, again, the Energy Board and the Policy Board, understand the mission of what we do. She's been great at developing and working with staff. We have a wonderful team of people who care about what they're doing. They're passionate about what they do every day, the projects that they're assigned, the way that they think about centers of excellence to get things done. We're beyond fortunate. The Energy Board is doing amazing things and looking at technology and conversation. What can we do to make things happen? How can we move the industry forward? And by far, our Policy Board is passionate and has a vision for the future to make sure that we're still doing things that make policy differences. So we're honored to get together and celebrate the leaders again that we think, that we know, have done wonderful things and continue again to make sure that the conversations are rich. So from that standpoint, I'll tell you a little bit more about the video and we'll get going soon. Again, it's the first overall charter school development. And what we did is we created centers where we blended a center for education, a center for tribal relationships, and indigenous engagement. And we blended all of those concepts together to make sure that the program was successful. And ultimately, again, we wanted to make sure that the Mountain Ute Reservation whole community was able to participate in this program. It's called Growing Ute Futures. And it's mapping an innovative and student-focused model of learning and supporting all students and families. I'm going to focus on that, and families. It's one thing to think about the children. It's another thing to make sure that the parents feel involved and connected to that education. So ultimately, it's a cornerstone of an initiative that they've been working on. It's getting great results. It's been very successful. We have a name, Key You Got Community Academy, or KCA, which I'm better at. And again, wrapping up our first year, we're super excited about it. So with that, I'll say let's go ahead and look at the video and see how it went. And thanks again for being here tonight.
I've had kids tell me that they had to change who they were from going to Toyoak to go to Cortez. I have to change who I am. I have to be different. I had a friend tell me that a kid told him it was like passing through a veil. I was this way in Toyoak, now I have to be this way in Cortez.
My daughter being able to be here and come home learning, talking about things that she's learned and that she loves to go to school. She loves her teachers. It's just, there's just words that can't explain how it makes me feel being a parent and having my child be in a school like this.
We're not only preserving, but we're reintroducing in a lot of places. I've got families that come in and go, he came home and this is what he said to me. And they're teaching. So our kids are literally teaching their parents Ute language.
That's what she does. She comes home every day and she's counting, she's saying colors, she's seeing animals where we're driving, she says them all in Ute. She's teaching us how to say words and introducing ourselves. And so, you know, that's important because we don't have any Ute speakers in our home, but she's the one exposing us and bringing that home. And so she's not only learning it, but she's also teaching others how to speak.
But really, when you get down to it, KCA is that it's that seed that we're planting to see who's going to be the future teacher, who's going to be the future principal, who's going to be, are we creating a pipeline to go to whatever higher ed or certificate program that students want to do.
One of our goals is to have a comprehensive master plan of education quadrant. So that is really where we're going to bring preschool, KCA, K-12, and higher ed all together. And our Growing You Futures is also a piece in that, because we are going to be here to help support the students and their families with tutoring, with wraparound services, with IT support.
The KCA, as important as it is just one component. The Growing You Futures is this wraparound process that helps the families, that looks at the social and emotional support for kids, for families as well. Embedding that and having that all work together, and having an organization like Keystone who have experts in education, who've built schools before, who've been superintendents, who've been teachers, who've developed curriculum, like that's amazing. That's what we need, those partnerships.
Keystone has brought us all together to have conversations, and that wasn't happening. Keystone has been that facilitator, I guess is what I would say. Very strong, and those things wouldn't happen if they weren't saying, hey, we need to have a meeting at this time, can you join us? And then it happens.
It's a great video to start off the night with. What we're going to do is have a set of discussions with our impressive winners of tonight's awards. The first discussion with one of the honorees will be with Diane Regas, whose work creates equitable access for people for outdoors by protecting public land where it's needed most. But before we learn more about Diane's inspiring leadership as president and CEO of the Trust for Public Land, I want to introduce the person who will be interviewing her, part of our 10-minute interviews. Ben Jealous is the president of the People for the American Way. He's the former national president and CEO of the NAACP, a time when I saw him on television a lot. He's the former executive director of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Hooray for the freedom of the press. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Ben Jealous, who will lead a discussion with our first winner.
Well, good evening. Hey, Diane, thank you for being here. Welcome to my living room.
Oh, wonderful.
So let's just get right into it. You know, parks and green spaces are wonderful. Who doesn't love a park? But with all the crises we are now facing as a society, climate change, racial violence, systemic racism, the lasting effects of the pandemic, and the volatile economy, many people might not see parks and open space as a priority. How do parks, green space fit into the biggest priorities facing our country, or do they?
I'm going to first ask the audience to close your eyes and try to remember the last time you walked in a green space, in a park, on a trail, and try to remember how you felt. Probably pretty good. Maybe you were with family or friends or having a picnic, or maybe you were climbing Kilimanjaro. You probably felt pretty good. Open your eyes, and I will tell you that the science backs what you felt. You felt good, and people do feel better. But being outside is not just better for us individually, it's better for our communities. You know, I was talking with a tribal leader today, and he said to me, you know, we need to be outdoors to be our fullest selves. And the science, the Western science, backs that up in spades. I'm going to just share a few examples of that. So right now in the United States of America, your zip code is a better predictor of your longevity and health than your genetic code. Where I live in the Bay Area, in Oakland, a child born in Oakland is a 12-year shorter life expectancy than someone born just 2 miles away in Piedmont. 12 years difference. But parks actually change that outcome, and they do it very, very quickly. The science shows that All-cause mortality goes down very quickly when people are exposed to parks, and the impact is actually greater for the lowest income. Amazing. But that's not where it stops. So if you want to think about the breadth and depth of impact of parks, there's a researcher at University of Pennsylvania who has looked at what are the impacts of taking asphalt areas and turning them into green space. And what she has found has blown us away, even though we've all believed in this for a long time. She found a 29% drop in gun-related assaults. She found a 62% drop in poor mental health in the areas of Philadelphia that needed that the most. But parks are not just profound for climate change, for health, they are profound for climate change as well, in ways that even though you work in this space, and if you're like me, you've been working in it for a long time, you might not have thought about. So areas that have parks are cooler in the summer. They are better, they're more resilient to flooding, and they have better air quality. And we know bad air quality is one of the biggest killers in our country. But if you draw a circle around a park, about a half-mile circle, a 10-minute walk, that area is going to be, on average, 6 degrees cooler than areas outside that. And in some places here in Washington, D.C., NOAA measured a 17-degree difference. So if you think about the impacts of climate change and think about the impacts on people, excess heat is the biggest weather-related killer in our country. 6 degrees, 17 degrees, that is a big difference. The last thing I want to mention, though, and I think this one surprises people the most, is that engaging around a park, engaging around what are the cultural values we want in our open space, what are the cultural values we bring, actually improves social cohesion, which we desperately need in this country right now. I'll just give you one example. In South Wenatchee in Washington State, which is a farm worker community, voter turnout tripled over one election cycle after that community got involved with us on their park. But access to parks in this country is not equitable. Your access to public space is more driven by your skin color, by your racial identity, by your zip code, by your income. So there's 100 million people in this country who don't have a park within a 10-minute walk. 28 million kids don't have somewhere to go outside close to home. And our research has shown that if you are black or brown in this country, you have 43% less access to outdoor space on a per acre per person basis. And the similar is true if you look at it through an income lens. So parks play an absolutely vital role in addressing the biggest challenges facing our country, but they're inequitably distributed, and that's what we are aiming to fix.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Getting to speed and scale in solving climate change is essential. As is a commitment to equity, to shared prosperity. How do you reconcile the Trust for Public Lands commitment to work alongside communities and build trust with the need for speed?
Yeah, because trust takes time. And working with communities and listening to communities takes time. But first of all, I don't believe this is a forced trade-off. We need it all, right? We need it all to address climate change. But in my view, communities must be at the center if we're going to implement comprehensive solutions that stick. And we need the solutions to stick. And I want to just share one example. There's a community in the Los Angeles area called Pacoima. It's a small community. It's actually where Senator Padilla is from, and lots of other wonderful leaders. In the 50s and 60s, when Los Angeles was growing, it was one of the only places where Black and Hispanic people were allowed to own land. And fast forward, the racist redlining that was experienced in that community was just multiplied because there was no basic investment in public infrastructure, no curbs and gutters, no parks. Instead, those communities got big, dirty junkyards. I've driven through that community, and I can tell you, the junkyard is right there next to the kids' schools. And that was a result of policies that were being implemented and have been implemented across our country, and the echoes of that still exist in communities. Right now, that community is about 50,000 people. It's squeezed between two highways and a private airport, which by the income of people in Pacoima, they don't get to use. And if you read the New York Times about who was most impacted by COVID in 2020, they spotlighted Pacoima. Pacoima also has the highest rates of asthma and the highest rates of childhood obesity in the Los Angeles area. So some moms got together, which is often how good things start. Some moms got together and created an organization called Pacoima Beautiful. And they started just by planting trees and picking up litter. And you might think that's small, and it is, but that action on their part, getting together in the community, sparked an inspirational change. And I feel very fortunate that my organization, TPL, the Trust for Public Land, got to work with them on the next phase, which was to put together a comprehensive plan and get tens of millions of dollars from the government to fund implementation of it. And by 2025, that community is going to have greener spaces. We're going to help them redo a park, but they're also going to have safer streets. They're also going to have new clean energy infrastructure. If you go in that community and just say, well, why don't you guys buy electric cars? It doesn't work. You need to engage the community and respond to the needs that they have. So I just want to emphasize, if we want to create more equity and justice in this country, we have to recognize that health, climate, equity are very much connected. And we have to support communities to address these issues holistically, because that's how they live them. And delaying those investments is going to delay the implementation of the climate work that we need to do. And it's going to undermine the stickiness of it. So I think investing in communities, working with communities to help them bring forward their vision is going to pay off for all those things.
Thank you for what you do. Talk to us, and I'm going to ask you two questions here in one, because we have like 2 minutes left. What are the challenges and opportunities ahead for the Trust for Public Lands for the next 50 years? And, you know, I got to ask, I was talking to my old boss, Leon Panetta. I worked for him 32 years ago.
A hero.
Yeah, 33 years ago. And that was back when, you know, it was just after Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan were still drinking together. You know, people in this town talked to each other. They listened to each other. They figured out how to work together. But we're in these times now. Give us some examples of how the work you do helps people work together across this division we feel throughout our country.
So I don't want to gloss over how difficult that is. I feel like in my lifetime it's the most difficult it's been. But time and again, I have seen people be able to bridge those divides, and I think we all need to recommit ourselves to doing that. You know, I've seen here in Washington, the Great Outdoors Act passed just within the last couple of years, and it drives conservation across this country. It had wide bipartisan support all across the country. There are things that Americans agree on, and we need to emphasize those. But I will say that I've been very moved by the stories that I've seen when I visit communities around the country. There's a place called Lanier Park in Philadelphia where it was the epicenter of racist violence in that city for decades and generations. And finally, the police got so frustrated, they decided to close off the park that had been the site of a lot of that. 4 acres of beautiful space in a tightly packed neighborhood, and they just put up 10-foot fences. But when the community got together, and we were fortunate to be able to be there to help them, and said, let's figure this out. The black side of the park and the white side of the park actually sat down together. By the way, it took them 2 years of work to sit at the same table. But what happened was they decided on what they wanted, and we helped them, the city helped them build it, and they decided to create a unity trail, and they walk it together every week. And it's such a symbol of what's possible. And I'm excited about all the places I see that happening. I'm thrilled to be working with Keystone and Ernest House, to be talking with Native American tribes about how we can bridge some of the differences and repair some of what's happened in the past. So I'm optimistic about what's possible, even in these very, very difficult times. So Ben, thank you for being up here with me.
Thank you for having me on your board.
Thank you. Good. Thanks so much. We're supposed to go that way.
Okay, you got that?
Yep.
I'll grab this.
Thank you, Ben and Diane, for a very stimulating discussion. Lots of interesting ideas there. Our next awardee after 4 years of service in the Marines, including 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, launched the original air-ground Federal Express network in 1973. Under Frederick W. Smith's leadership, FedEx has grown into an $87 billion global enterprise that serves more than 220 countries and territories. And if you're like me, there are times in America where you think FedEx may be about the only thing that's really working around here. Unfortunately, Mr. Smith could not be with us, but he did record an interview with Dr. Ingrid Burke, the Dean of the Yale School of the Environment, where they talked about FedEx's delivery of COVID-19 vaccines, its commitment to being carbon neutral, and how FedEx's distinct culture grew. So let's watch the interview.
We all know Frederick W. Smith as the founder and now executive chairman of FedEx. The concepts behind FedEx were crafted during his time as an undergraduate at Yale College, from which he graduated in 1966. His vision and innovative leadership have been transformative, not only to how goods and services are moved around the globe, but also in how corporate leaders can and should make a difference for the lives of their employees, customers, and the planet. It's been my honor to work with Fred and his colleagues at FedEx over the past few years to establish the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture, which we'll speak about in a minute. Congratulations, Fred, on this award from the Keystone Policy Center, and thank you for joining me to talk about the important work that FedEx is doing around the world.
Thank you, Indy. I appreciate very much being here.
FedEx has many years of experience connecting businesses and consumers around the world, including all the high-value shipments and consumer goods when and where they're needed. In the past few years, FedEx has been front and center in the remarkable delivery of supplies and vaccines in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Tell us your thoughts on the work of your team and the work of FedEx throughout the pandemic.
Indy, I'm enormously honored to accept this award on behalf of the team members which you just referenced, particularly for the movement of these incredible vaccines that have taken us out of this incredible travesty of the COVID-19 pandemic. So when the new Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were first brought out in the fall of 2020, naturally the U.S. government, under the remarkable and competent leadership of General Perna of the U.S. Army, he came to FedEx and UPS to move these very important medicines that had to be moved with virtual perfection overnight. But we had a little small device, the SensaWare device, that we put on the packages that allowed us to see them in real time. This allowed us to see each and every package as it moved through the FedEx system. And our team members were just so proud to be able to deliver these vaccines. In fact, we delivered the very first one in Boston, Massachusetts from Grand Rapids, Michigan overnight at something like 5:30 in the morning. But that's just sort of indicative of what FedEx does. It's capable of doing these incredible logistic feats, which we sort of take for granted, but when you saw it in the context of the COVID vaccine distribution, it really makes clear what our folks are able to do for humanity every day.
So just over a year ago, FedEx announced the goal to take global operations of carbon neutral by 2040. I'm curious, what drove your focus on the environment and why now?
Well, I think there were several reasons that we embraced. So the first reason is just hard coal business. That's the way our customer base is going. The second reason that we embraced it is because we use a lot of fossil fuels. We operate 700 airplanes, 200,000 trucks, we have 5,000 facilities. So these legacy systems are mostly fossil fuel based. And for a long time, understanding the issue of carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere, we were looking for ways to reduce our carbon footprint because it was good economics for us too. because the more efficient we became, the less our costs, the better prices we could provide our customers. So that was the second reason that we embraced it. It was just, how do we reduce the consumption of fossil fuels?
This gift that FedEx gave to Yale is really transformational, and certainly finding solutions to address aviation emissions is hard. It's really hard. When we started, you acknowledged the work of your FedEx team members almost right away, which I find you to do regularly. And FedEx is really admired as part of its brand for having a reputation of a top culture, and that is caring about your employees and your employees caring about your customers. As we close, can you share your thoughts on how FedEx has built such a distinct culture?
It recognizes fundamentally that in the services industries, unlike, let's say, manufacturing or agriculture, the difference between success and failure, or great results and poor results, is the discretionary effort that every member of that service organization pulls from themselves to accomplish the mission. But in the business that we're in, 19 million shipments, any one of which could be a life or death shipment, a golden package as we call it, that discretionary effort, when something goes wrong or to complete the transaction correctly and so forth, can have profound implications. So the people, service, profit philosophy of FedEx just recognizes the importance and, quite frankly, the value of having people all aligned against keeping that purple promise. I will make every FedEx experience outstanding. So built around that culture are a series of things that we do to try to meet human needs and expectations. Maslow, some other sociologists would have this better down than I am, but people want to be involved. That's why we say we connect people in possibilities and stress to people the important work that we do, because that motivation that creates withdraws that discretionary effort. And then we reinforce it in all kinds of ways. We promote from within. We make sure we put great leaders in our first line management positions. We reward people for doing a good job. There are all kinds of things that we do, but that's where the culture came from, is the recognition that a great service company depends on discretionary effort to a much greater degree than more traditional business activities.
Well, Fred, it sounds like you credit the whole organization, but by virtue of this award and what I think we all credit you for setting that example and setting that culture. In closing, is there anything else that you'd like to say to the Keystone Leadership Award audience?
Well, I want to say again how honored I am to receive this. And again, I stress that I am receiving on behalf of these hundreds of thousands of people who have earned it. And that's not excessive humility on my part. It's just a recognition of the facts of the matter. Because I don't go outdoors and deliver any of those 19 million packages per day. Lots of other people are doing that. So I'm happy to receive the award, and I'm happy probably more than anything to receive the reward for what it represents and the commitment to excellence in this increasingly important field of environmental stewardship and the responsibility to leave our planet in a lot better shape for our children and grandchildren than we found it. And I think the only way to get there in many ways is because of the scientists and the scholars and all like you and your team, Indy. So let me congratulate and thank you and them as well.
Congratulations, Fred, and thanks so much for spending the time with me.
One additional footnote to that, which Christine Scanlon notes, is that FedEx also stepped up during the baby formula crisis and is trying very much to help solve that. Our next awardee made history in 2000 when she became the first woman from Michigan to be elected to the United States Senate. Throughout her career, Senator Debbie Stabenow has been known for her ability to build coalitions, get things done for her home state. Tonight, she will be interviewed by Kevin Kolivar, the Vice President of Global Government Affairs for the Dow Chemical Company, which is based in Midland, Michigan. Prior to joining Dow, Kevin served as the Assistant Secretary for Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability in the United States Department of Energy. And I hope you're keeping an eye on things still, Kevin. It's my pleasure to turn this 10-minute interview over to Kevin and Senator Stabenow.
10 minutes. We're live. 10 minutes to interview. Okay.
All right.
I was thinking backstage, I have 10 minutes to interview someone who's trained in the art of the filibuster.
I can talk forever.
Where's Wolf Blitzer when you need him?
I know. I will.
Thanks for the opportunity to join you,
Of course.
Senator, and
Before
congratulations.
you start, I have to say thank you to Keystone. Thank you. And thank you to all my Michigan friends that are here. So many friends in the audience that are from Michigan or Michigan connections, including a little company called Dow Chemical Company.
Well, thank you very much. So, Senator, Keystone is all about collaboration. Right. And you have a well-earned reputation in this town for collaboration, bipartisan, bicameral. And I think the question a lot of people get asked all the time in this space is, how do you do it? But I want to change it a little bit and ask, in an era where we seem to be highlighting divisions more than not, why do you do it?
You know, first of all, coming from Michigan, you know, we're pretty much about being practical and having common sense. And it's a lot more fun to work together to get things done, honestly. I mean, you know, you can stand up and yell about something and then have no sense of accomplishment at all. You know, maybe that lasts a couple of minutes. But the truth is, we've got a lot of big problems. And it's more gratifying to work together to get things done. You know, our state in Michigan, we make things and grow things. That's what we do. And I don't think you have an economy unless you do that. And I think people on both sides of the aisle care about that. And so when I work on electric vehicles or clean energy manufacturing tax credits in a bipartisan way, or when I'm working on writing the Farm Bill as the chair of the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, which is way more than, the Farm Bill doesn't even touch it for folks who know. Largest conservation investment in the country for land and water, bioenergy, agriculture, food policy, and so on. But you don't do those big things unless you work cross the aisle, unless you listen, unless you respect all sides. I work with folks on an issue that I then vote the opposite way they vote 99% of the time. But that's okay. You know, I think of the Flint water crisis. The chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee was Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. He and I don't vote the same, but he helped us on Flint. We would not have gotten the support to replace the Flint water pipes without Chairman Inhofe. And I'm very grateful for that. Roy Blunt and I work together on community behavioral health centers. We've worked for 9 years now, and we think as part of what we hope will be some common sense gun reforms, that we're going to also include some really important investments around community behavioral health care, and that will be based on what Roy and I have been doing. And we don't vote the same all the time. He's a great friend, but we don't vote the same all the time. And so it's much more gratifying, though, to find, and my philosophy is, you need to agree with a person on one thing, get that done, and then you can go find the one thing you agree with somebody else on, and you can get that done, and then you can go from there. And so I think that's the best approach for me. I have found that, you know, and I could go on and on and on. Rob Portman and I on Great Lakes restoration. I mean, there's just a litany of really great partners I've had that I very much appreciate, who've been willing to say, okay, I agree with you on this, let's go get it done.
So, absolutely. So legislative solutions end in DC, but they don't start in DC.
No, not at all.
And so you represent a state that is a world-class agricultural state, of course, a major automotive center, some great manufacturers, some great utilities, and of course the home of one of the major labor unions.
Right.
How do you balance these issues at home? How do you bring these different constituencies together to be effective at home so that you can be effective here?
Well, first of all, everything for me starts through Michigan. I see everything through the eyes of Michigan. That's my responsibility, to represent our state. Great skilled labor, great businesses. We are the innovators. We did create the first automobile. We are the folks that put America on wheels. We are the folks that created the middle class with our great unions. And so I'm very proud of that. We are a state of greater diversity of types of crops than any other state but California. And as I like to say at home, who cares about California? Just a joke for the press. But I think you have to start, first of all, by knowing your state, respecting all sides. It's hard to bring people together with different views, you know, around whether it's business and labor or environmental issues and business or the agricultural community and others. But it starts really with understanding. You have to have some depth of knowledge so that you can find compromise. You don't do that with sound bites. It's not what you're looking at on Facebook or Twitter. You have to really pay attention to what is it and get people off of up here and then try to talk about, okay, how could you find a way to bring people together? And I think that's really important. When I think talking about climate, I've spent years working with our farmers and ranchers about the role they play and can play in conservation and keeping carbon in the ground and managing methane, and our foresters and trees. And by the way, when we look at climate, we're looking at both stopping pollution or slowing it down, but then we also have to take it out of the atmosphere, because it's not enough just to stop what we're doing. You got to take it out of the atmosphere. And trees, you want to take carbon out of the atmosphere, plant a tree. If you want to take a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere, plant 1 billion trees. In fact, Rob Portman and I got our replant bill in the infrastructure bill to plant 1.1 billion trees, which are going to be funded across the country on public lands for trees, which are not only about equity and all the other issues that are incredibly important, it's also about taking carbon out of the air. So, I worked with farmers for a long, long time before they finally felt, okay, the climate crisis is real. So what are we going to do about it?
Right.
It took a lot of time to get folks to that point. But having done that, and it took a lot of years to do that, last year we passed 92 to 8 in the United States Senate, the only climate-related bill that has passed the United States Senate, called Growing Climate Solutions, to support farmers and ranchers and foresters to be more heavily and aggressively in the area of climate solutions. So it takes some time.
And hopefully that's a model for others as well.
Hopefully.
So we have a little bit of time. You're a people person, so I thought I would take a twist on a lightning round.
Okay.
And throw some names out for you. And you can take a pass if you
Okay.
like. Senator Roy Blunt.
Roy Blunt is a dear friend, and we would not be accomplishing what we're doing on mental health if it was not for his partnership.
President Zelensky.
Incredibly courageous. What do you say about him? What do you say? Yeah, leadership. I mean, just
Leadership.
incredible.
Michelle Obama.
Inspiring. Somebody who I admire greatly, and somebody who continues to inspire Americans. Yeah.
Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham. sometimes crazy and sometimes good. Depends on the day.
And my favorite one of these to put on you is your mom.
My mom. My mom is the best. I am so lucky to have my mom, who will be turning 96 in a month. 42 years in nursing, a retired nurse who has supported me and my brothers in a way that only a child could hope for.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure and honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
It's
All
heavy.
right. It is heavy. It's heavy. Okay. Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Senator Stabenow. We next have a video which features the partnership between Dow and the Keystone Policy Center to create a step-by-step guide to collaboration. This is the recipe for the secret sauce of Keystone. It's called a Collaborative Action Toolkit, and it gives a roadmap to navigating a multi-stakeholder collaborative approach to solving global challenges as well as local ones. So let's take a look.
We really just had this vision about collaboration. We're seeing all types of challenges around the world, between global warming, different types of pollution, how do we have water for everybody, natural areas for everybody, that we can't solve on our own.
Dow initially came to us in order to meet their blueprint goals, in order to get assistance with partnering with external organizations, with an idea that they'd be able to tackle some of these bigger issues.
We knew we had a couple great collaborations that we had done before, and we knew that Keystone were experts in really diving deep on how do you construct a multi-stakeholder collaboration. And we wanted to bring the two together to create a framework, a toolkit that we could really use for all of our employees to make these types of collaborations.
Dow approached us in 2019, approached Keystone to help develop a process for them to meet their blueprint goals. As we understood it at the time, these blueprint goals were helping them address sustainability issues like eliminating plastic waste, addressing climate change, enabling sustainable, reliable water supplies.
And so the toolkit first began as, we called it the Blueprint Thinking Toolkit, and it was more specific to Dow. And then that's where we took the employee-specific Blueprint Thinking Toolkit and said, with Keystone, you know what, this is a great tool. Let's share it with everybody. And so we worked with Keystone to kind of take out some of the Dow-specific pieces, keep the nuts and bolts in the middle, and share it with everybody.
The toolkit is now freely available on the Keystone website for download. In order to make it more generally useful, we loaded it up with all kinds of comments and questions. I mentioned it's a guided conversation, and we put all the prompts in there that you need in order to make a well-considered partnership or strategic relationship.
Keystone was such an integral part in this for us. And I just want to emphasize their know-how and their ability to put to paper and to put to an actual toolkit what we were thinking. It was exceptional.
Our next awardee has been one of the most sought-after experts during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Scott Gottlieb has spent his career advancing public health and improving medical outcomes, most directly and recently as the 23rd Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration from 2017 to 2019. You also may have seen him on CNBC and Face the Nation and other places. And as a personal note, I'm a former television executive who studied all about interviews under the tutelage of Roone Arledge, the legendary Roone Arledge at ABC News, and I'm married to an emergency room doctor. So we have spent 2 years plus sitting on the couch looking at all of the talking head doctors. And Dr. Scott Gottlieb is a wonder unto himself. And the reason is that as an old school journalist, I appreciate the way in which he never gets drawn in to the politicization or the mousetraps that my beloved brothers and sisters in the news business sometimes put up for our interview subjects. And he is going to be interviewed by another great man of medicine, Dr. Arthur Kapling, the founding head of the Division of Medical Ethics at the NYU School of Medicine. And he also a member of the Keystone Policy Center Board. And he has taken a blood oath to try to throw Dr. Gottlieb off his game at least once and give one of the blunders that I mentioned as endearing at the start. So let's see what happens. Dr. Gottlieb.
Thanks, Scott. Let me just say, to get us underway, at the end of a long career in ethics, I've been surprised to find myself grappling with the most important ethical challenge the world has ever faced, which is COVID. And it comes about through issues around mandating vaccines, cementing trust in the public, in messaging that comes out from medicine, which has been noted, Scott does so well. My mom died of COVID when it first occurred. My wife, running the Bronx VA, got sick from COVID. And I also have taken a keen interest in COVID for a personal reason. I'm one of the last survivors of the 1957 polio outbreak. So I know about vaccines. I've always been worried that we don't pay enough attention to vaccination as one way to battle with COVID. And I've really just respected Scott for his work, his efforts, not just as a communicator, but with industry, with regulators, trying to make sure that the best science has to offer to battle these plagues, infectious diseases, and epidemics gets done. So I'll add my congratulations to that. Please. That said, let me start off with something else that's been driving me crazy. Baby formula. I'm not so interested in what we're doing to move it around the world. What I'm interested in is the FDA on the ball with respect to, manufacturers of a vital product, a food safety issue? Are you comfortable that we can anticipate in the future, say, infections? I know you're very familiar with genetic screening with regard to viruses, animals, and people. Do we have the tools to make sure this doesn't happen again, to get ahead of an outbreak that shuts down a plant like this?
Yeah, look, these were persistent problems that were handled poorly for a long period of time, both by the sponsor and I think by FDA. I was surprised by the level of problems within that plant when the FDA inspectors went into that plant. I think that plant should have been inspected at least on an annual basis. During the government shutdown, when all of our inspectors were on furlough, I brought back inspectors unpaid, and they agreed to do this to inspect two products, produce and infant formula. We knew that the inspections of the infant formula had to go on because these facilities are critical facilities. We have right now, I think, the worst of both worlds in the US. We have a stringent regulatory system designed to ensure problems don't arise that hasn't been stringent enough to prevent problems like this, but is sufficiently stringent that it creates barriers to entry and is at least part of the contribution for why we have an oligopoly for infant formula manufacturing in this country. And I think the solution is to think of a regulatory paradigm that makes it possible for new entrants to enter the market. Only one truly new entrant has entered the market in the last 15 years with the new manufacturing facility, the company ByHeart, and also exerts more control and oversight of the existing facilities to make sure that these problems don't arise. There's a reason we have, I'll pause here, but there's a reason we have a closed infant formula system in this country. It's because we've seen catastrophic problems from abroad. We saw melamine in infant formula in China kill infants. In Europe, which is sort of being held up as a utopia for competition, they have a dairy standard for their regulation of infant formula, and they have far many more recalls than we do. They have problems with bacteria like Salmonella, which we seldom see here in the US. And so we don't necessarily, I don't think that there would be a consensus that we want to accept that regulatory standard. We regulate infant formula much closer to a drug standard in this country. I think most people want it to be that way, but we need to make sure it's working. And so I think it's going to require a stepped up cadence of inspection of these facilities. I think it's going to require more testing of product. You can't test in safety, but you can do better surveillance. I think Coronabacter in particular should be a reportable pathogen. Infant Coronabacter infection should be a reportable pathogen, because these outbreaks aren't going to be large outbreaks when they occur. They're going to be one infection here and there. It's going to be sporadic and very hard to detect. So there's things we can do, I think, to both exert better oversight as well as make the process for bringing new updates of infant formulas and new infant formulas into the market to create more competition. That's where I'd be focused from a policy standpoint.
Let me tell you another thing that's been driving me wacky, and I think you may have some insight here. So we saw a lot of people told it's time to get a booster for COVID. And boosters were presented as something that you needed for maybe a third shot. There are people out there now wondering, am I supposed to get a fourth shot? Did we mislabel boosters? Were we really dealing to begin with a 3-shot vaccine that we all should have gotten to begin with?
Yeah, well, look, I don't think it was recognized up front that the protection wasn't going to be that durable. And the other thing that happened was that we had new variants come along. I think if we were still dealing with the original variant, the durability of the protection would have been more persistent. I think what happened around the debate on the boosters, and I was part of this. I remember the weekend when Pfizer put out the press release. I'm on the board of Pfizer, saying that we're going to be pursuing a clinical study to look at the efficacy of boosters. We undertook a 10,000 patient randomized study, a study that will never be done again, a huge study, announced that we were going to be filing with FDA for approval of a third dose. And CDC and FDA put out an extraordinary statement rebuking Pfizer for that. I was on Face the Nation that weekend defending it. I think we spent a very long time arguing that we didn't need boosters when the data was emerging to suggest that we probably did need boosters. Yep. And then by the time we pivoted, you know, in a span of literally 2 months, CDC went from saying, no way, we don't need boosters, to pleading with people to get boosters. That's not a rational public policy framework. I mean, we should have had better decision making. And, you know, Pfizer was scolded at the time for putting out that statement. But we were undertaking the clinical study, so we had to announce we were doing it. And it was that study that demonstrated convincingly that the boosters provided substantially greater protection. That was the basis of the ultimate approval.
Shifting gears again, we see a lot of people saying they don't trust as much messaging about vaccines or masking or other measures that we might take to intercept new strains of COVID, monkeypox, whatever infectious disease might be thrown at us. Some say they didn't trust because they heard talk of warp speed and cutting corners. Others watch Joe Rogan as their source of medical information on a daily basis. Sorry, Joe, but how do we regain the trust?
Yeah, and everyone who reads Barry Weiss thinks they're an epidemiologist. I mean, yeah, I think that we didn't. You know, one of the things that I did when I was in the role at FDA is talked a lot about when we were wrong, and you know, tried to show humility around the fact that we didn't always have all of the answers up front. We talked about what we didn't know a lot, and I don't think we did enough of that in the context of this pandemic. We didn't acknowledge when we were wrong and why, and explain why we made mistakes in judgment. I think we didn't acknowledge enough uncertainty when we were putting out guidance, and there was a lot of uncertainty along the way, and there was a perception. I was part of some of these discussions with the White House, particularly during the Trump administration, when I was talking more with the administration. There was concern that if you put out too nuanced of a message, it would be confusing, and you'd be sending mixed messages. The original hesitation around telling people to wear masks was that, well, we're telling people they should stay home, and if we tell them they should wear masks, we're basically saying it's okay to go out if you wear a mask. There's ways to be direct with the public and explain these things, and I think too many people got caught in a box where they didn't provide sort of a fulsome description to the public for fear of confusing the public. And I think we sometimes, as public health officials, overestimate that. We take the public for granted. I think you can go out with a nuanced message. You can acknowledge uncertainty and still galvanize the public behind collective action. And so we should have been a little bit more trusting, probably.
I agree. Last question, watching the time here. Going forward, I had a conversation the other day with someone with ALS, very serious, sad, horrible disease, and they said, looks like you sped things up at the FDA and other regulatory bodies to get vaccines through, to get some medicines through, some that were subsequently withdrawn, but nonetheless, speed. Can the FDA go faster for other people, not facing COVID, but ALS or Parkinsonism, or we've seen decisions about Alzheimer's drugs recently in the news? Is there a way for more speed?
Well, look, I think I don't think of this as something that's speed or not speed. I think that there's ways to make the development process more efficient in terms of how we do clinical trials. So, for example, when you're doing a clinical trial in an unmet medical need, use historical matched controls and natural history models rather than randomizing patients to placebo, which would be very hard to enroll and unethical, perhaps in certain settings. So I think there's ways to make the development process more efficient. But I think the biggest sort of product of this speed that you talk about during my time at FDA was the fact that the drugs we were seeing were the biology was so well understood and the drugs were targeting such fundamental aspects of disease and the patients were being so carefully selected on the basis of their ability to respond to a treatment that in early stages of development, you were seeing outsized responses. And so when you put a drug in 30
You think they were skimming a little bit?
Well, not skimming. You were selecting patients based on molecular signatures that you were targeting with the drugs for their basis to respond. You understood the biology of disease. So if you put a drug in 30 cancer patients, as we saw last week, and all 30, their tumors disappear, what do you do with that? Do you then do a large phase 3 study and take 4 years? Or do you prove that through accelerated approval because you could literally save lives? And that's what we're seeing more and more because the science is creating those opportunities.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your well-deserved award from Keystone. Keystone's in the space with respect to food, safety, public health problems, relationships to climate, and I know we'll be talking to you in the future as to get better guidance on all of that.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thanks so much. How do you want to do it? Do you want me?
Oh, picture? Yep, sure. Picture. Picture. Well, he knows all about pictures. Thanks, Ned.
Thank you. What a brilliant discussion of two top-flight medical minds. It's a privilege to watch that. We now have a last video, which is centered around the fact that in 2007, Colorado became the first state in the nation to create a consultation agreement with American Indian tribes that were forcibly removed from the state. A total of 46 tribes having been removed by force or by treaty from the state over the last 150 years. In the years since that agreement, the city of Boulder, Colorado has sought to develop a working collaborative and in order to do that on matters related to land management and parks and open space with members of those tribes. They still view Colorado as their homeland, and more than a dozen tribes agreed to work with the city, and the Keystone Policy Center has served as the consultant, mediator, and facilitator in those discussions. Our final project highlight video of the evening showcases the Keystone Policy Center ushering that collaboration at the speed of trust between the city of Boulder and indigenous and tribal communities.
The city of Boulder first got introduced into the concept and participated in what is known as tribal consultation back in the late 1990s.
The city of Boulder actually had an agreement in the late 90s and early 2000s for access to some of their parks and open space, to do ceremonial events and things that the indigenous community and Native American community in the urban area had done for many years.
So having listened in and participated in that federal government consultation with tribal governments, the city of Boulder decided to continue that relationship and actually consult with the tribes from a city's perspective. It was really the Indigenous Peoples Day resolution that the city council adopted in 2016 that really gave a rise and an impetus to wanting to rekindle our our formal negotiations with the tribal nations.
It's one thing when the government, in this case, a local government, says we want to build relationships with tribes. You really have to create that map, that roadmap and the framework on your ensuring that your staff is aware and knowledgeable about these issues, and at the same time that they're building simultaneously the working relationship with tribe as these projects move forward.
Ernest has been wonderful. I mean, it's now we almost talk it weekly, monthly on the issues of building our relationships with indigenous peoples and American Indian nations, and without Ernest, we would be sort of swimming in water not very effectively. So we owe a lot to Ernest in that regards.
Collaboration happens at the speed of trust. I say that all the time because I've seen it happen, and it's the best example, especially related with the history of indigenous people and our country. If there's an effort to actually build a process and relationship, that's where I think consultation, or whatever you want to call it, relationship building at the end of the day is what it is.
Our next awardee is the world-famous Wolf Blitzer of CNN, the man who exemplifies the best of the news business. What a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
So I'll give just a couple of elements of background. Wolf has been with CNN for 32 years, starting in 1990, when, as I recall, the next year you were winning awards already in the Gulf War. And before that, he had been part of the Jerusalem Post, running the one-man Washington bureau of the Jerusalem Post, where I believe you were there about 17 years with the legendary Ari Roth, who was the great editor. And at one point in 1977, Anwar Sadat was in Washington, and Wolf asked a question towards the end of the press conference, saying, why don't you have travel between Egypt and Israel, students, athletes, and others? Some months later, incredibly, Egypt and Israel began the process of making peace with Anwar Sadat, going to Jerusalem, and Wolf was singled out by Anwar Sadat himself as the person whose question kept going through his mind. So when we talk about the art of the dialogue here at Keystone and the point of bringing along dialogue, I say example A right here. Now, I'll just add one other historic footnote. I was then the boy editor of the style section of the Washington Post. And we decided to, on this historic day, to do a little sidebar on Wolf. And in those days, the newspaper's first edition would come out at 10 o'clock, I'd get it, and if we had a dull headline, that was tough for the style section. And I saw this thing about From Buffalo to Cairo, the Odyssey of an Idea, or something like that. And I said, no. Let's say the reporter who started it all, and that was the guy. And from that day to this, a star was born. So I take a small bit of credit, but it's really Wolf and his amazing work. He's won DuPonts, he has won Edward R. Murrow's, he's won Emmys, he's won every award imaginable, and we are lucky to have a chance to talk to him at this epoch-making time in the world. So I wanted to talk briefly about three major areas. I'm just going to ask questions, one about the world, about our nation, and about the media. You've seen so many changes in all of them. First off, are we on the brink of World War III, or are we already in it?
The answer is no and no.
I feel better already. Okay, end of interview, that's it?
I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist. I think we have a great country. I think we'll get through this current crisis with Ukraine and Russia I don't think we're on the brink of World War III. God forbid. That would be terrible.
So do you have a couple of scenarios, because you have reported so much in diplomacy, for how Ukraine might either wind down or end? Not holding you to predictions.
Well, it's going to end either with Ukraine winning or Russia winning or them reaching some sort of deal to end it. Who knows what's going to happen?
Maybe you've spent a little too much time with the diplomats.
Yeah. It's a horrible situation.
Yeah.
I had on my show tonight the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, who's a very intelligent, wonderful woman. And we had dinner the other night, and we went through a lot of these contingencies. It's really hard for me to believe what what Putin has done to a neighboring country like Ukraine. Mm-hmm. If you take a look at the video, the images, the residential areas, the hospitals, the churches, the art galleries, the schools that have been leveled, it's hard for me to believe that in this day and age, a country like Russia would commit these atrocities to a neighboring Eastern European country like Ukraine. It's just heartbreaking to see it. And it's especially heartbreaking for me because I was in Moscow when the Soviet Union collapsed. And CNN sent me there to cover the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I saw Gorbachev sign the agreement ending 74 years of communist rule and ending the Soviet Union. And at that time, CNN then sent me to Minsk in Belarus for the first meeting of what's called the Commonwealth of Independent States, all the former republics of the Soviet Union. And it was an end of the Cold War. It was a very optimistic moment. And it was just so exciting to see what was happening. You know, all of us were afraid. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and we had drills of if there's a nuclear war, what do we do? And we'd hide it underneath the desk as if that was going to help us. But that's what we did. But it was so exciting to see the end of the Cold War, and peace was emerging. And for that peace now to unravel the way it has over these past several months with what the Russians have done to Ukraine, for no reason, Ukraine represented absolutely no threat to Russia at all. It was just, Putin and his ego deciding to do what he wanted to do to bring back, he believes the greatest catastrophe ever was the collapse of the Soviet Union. He wants to recreate that, which he's not going to be able to do, obviously. But to see what's going on has been so depressing, given the optimism that I had back then when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Cold War ended. And to see that, the struggle that's developed now, it's been a very depressing moment.
Well, I wish we could move to an even happier subject, but how about the United States of America and our national political scene? You have had, obviously, many guests commenting on that, but Andrew McCabe, I believe, last night was
the former deputy director of the FBI.
Was sobering indeed, talking about what he saw as domestic threats.
It's very depressing for all of us to see what's going on in our country right now. What happened in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, at a supermarket for no reason at all. What's happened in Uvalde, Texas, when a guy goes into an elementary school and starts killing kids and teachers. And we're the only country in the world where we see these horrific massacres taking place for no reason whatsoever. And I keep talking on my show about the need for what I call and others call common sense gun reform. Mm-hmm. Make it harder for people to get assault weapons. Make it harder for crazy people or disturbed people to get these kinds of killing, machines and all that. And it still hasn't happened, although there's a little bit of optimism right now that maybe these current negotiations will result in some tangible result, and we can only hope that it does. But it's a very depressing situation here as well.
We're going to have to shift to how do you relax? How do you get this out? Because I talked to your dear wife earlier and encouraged her because sometimes too much news can be a little
I relax when I see what Keystone is doing right now.
There we go. Hey.
When I see what all of you are doing tonight and the important work that you're doing, and it's going on, and it's a beautiful, beautiful moment for me to appreciate the great work that people do, volunteers, and all the people that you're honoring tonight.
That's wonderful.
And I want to thank you, Shelby, for what you've done. And he mentioned a story a long time ago. It was 1977, when he was editor of the style section of the Washington Post, and I was the Washington correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, an English language newspaper in Israel. And I was at this news conference with Anwar Sadat, the leader of Egypt, the largest Arab country, the greatest potential military threat to Israel, right on the border, Sinai and all that. And Sadat was there, and he met with Jimmy Carter, who was the new president of the United States. Carter invited Sadat to come to Washington. And at the end of his visit, he was staying at Blair House across the street from the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue. And he invited journalists to come. And I got a call from the Egyptian ambassador to the United States to invite me, even though I'm not an Israeli, I'm an American, but I was the Washington correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. And they invited me to come to this news conference with Anwar Sadat, which of course I was thrilled to do. And I watched Sadat during the course of that news conference. And he seemed so sincere in his quest for peace. He was very impressive. And as someone who has covered the Middle East, first as a reporter for the Reuters news agency in Tel Aviv, and then as the Washington correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, I knew something about the Middle East. And I knew, there could be another war. There had just been a '73 war, the Yom Kippur War, and all that. And Sadat seemed so sincere in his quest for peace. So I just raised my hand, and the ambassador, the Egyptian ambassador to the United States, was calling on reporters. He called on me, and I said, Wolf Blitzer, the Jerusalem Post. And I asked Sadat, Mr. President, you seem so sincere in your quest for peace. Why not do something tangibly? And why not establish some sort of dialogue or direct contact with the Israelis? And I was thinking of ping-pong diplomacy, as the U.S. and China had practiced. I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking of. And I said it might really be helpful for Israelis and Egyptians to start talking to each other and getting to know each other, and maybe that could result in some sort of peace. And his answer, which I thought was excellent, he said, I have no problem with that. But after so many wars and so many years of hatred and conflict, I don't think my people are yet ready for that. But I think I will try to do something. And a few months later, he announced he was going to Jerusalem to address the Knesset, Israel's parliament, and seek to make peace with the Israeli government. And then some reporter asked him, why now? Why are you doing it? And he cited the question. I was asked a question by a reporter in Washington at Blair House about this, and he then said, quote, the idea has germinated in my mind. He was speaking in Arabic, but that's the translation. The idea has germinated in my mind. And he gave me credit for that. And through the Washington Post, they gave me credit for that too. And I still have that front page of the style section. It wasn't just a little article. It was the front page of the style section, and across the front page of the style section was the headline, "The Reporter Who Started It All."
How about that?
That was me. And
we're so proud of Wolf in the journalism world. This is the art of dialogue. This is the best of what Keystone does in other areas, but sometimes as a reporter, you ask that question, you're always pushing. Sometimes it has a really amazing result.
You never know.
Congratulations to you.
It was a good question. And I tell the story to a lot of the CNN interns, the young college students who come in. When I go to a university and speak to students, I point out, I sometimes say, I tell the story, and I always point out that I was a young journalist. I was in my 20s when I asked Sadat that question. And over the years, I've discovered that some of the best journalism was achieved by young journalists in their 20s. Woodward and Bernstein, I don't know if you ever heard of them.
Oh, I edited Woodward's first magazine story back in the day.
So when Woodward and Bernstein reported on Watergate, they were in their 20s. They were young reporters who were just getting started, right?
Absolutely right. And after it turned into a big story, some of the big guys wanted to come in, and Ben Bradley and Howard Simons said, wait, leave it with the young guys.
These young guys did a great job, and so many other major stories have been reported and broken by young journalists in their 20s. And I tell these college students always, you know, get out there, and those first 10 years after you finish college potentially could be very formative in your career. So just go out and do it. After that story appeared, by the way, in the Washington Post, the reporter who started it all, when Sadat eventually did go a few days later to Jerusalem to address the Knesset, there was no CNN, there was no 24/7 cable television or news, but NBC broke into their programming to report on Sadat's arrival in Israel and his address at the Knesset, and they invited me as the reporter who started to be a commentator. That was the first time in my life I had ever really been on television. And of course I accepted that, and I haven't stopped being on television ever since. And it's been, and I accept this award, Shelby, not just on my behalf, but on behalf of the 4,000 men and women who work at CNN and report the news, not only here in the United States, but around the world. When Ted Turner, one of my heroes, launched CNN on June 1st, 1980, June 1st, 1980, CNN went on the air, and he said, we're the cable news network. We're going to report the news 24/7. People thought he was nuts. What's he do? Who's going to watch news 24/7? They called it chicken noodle news or whatever. But he had a vision, and at that time, his vision was not only that CNN would be in the United States, but would also broadcast around the world. And we're right now in countries where people see us, people watch The Situation Room, my daily 6 p.m. show, all over the world, and I get reaction from people all over the world. And Ted Turner, to his credit, had a vision that if people all over the world were watching the same news, maybe that would have a positive impact on peace around the world. And I think it did. In terms of the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think people were watching. When there was a failed coup, and I'll briefly tell this story, in Moscow in August of 1990, right after the first Gulf War, there was a failed coup. CNN, I was the Pentagon correspondent, the military affairs correspondent for CNN. CNN sent me to Moscow to cover the failed coup in the Soviet Union. And as soon as I landed, they organized an interview for me to do that we would broadcast live on CNN with the new Soviet defense minister. The Soviet Union was still around, Air Marshal Yevgeny Shaposhnikov. And I did this interview with him, and it was really, people were watching all over the world. It was through an interpreter, but we translated simultaneously. And then afterwards, he took me into the defense ministry in Moscow, and all of his generals were there. And he said, this is Wolf Blitzer from CNN. He wants to, and I came there to the Soviet Union because it looked like the end of the Cold War, with a list of bases that had been restricted to anyone outside of the Soviet Union, that my sources at the Pentagon said, if you get a chance, see if you can visit one of these bases. And so they gave me a list of the most restricted Soviet military bases, and I was the military affairs correspondent. Maybe they would let me visit one of them. I gave him a list, Shaposhnikov, of these bases that I wanted to visit, thinking, well, maybe he would approve one of them. He looked at the list, he gave it to a general who was standing next to him, and he said, approved. And I said, approved? He said, approved. I said, which one? He said, all of them. You can go anywhere you want. There's no more secrets. It's over. Cold War is over. We're moving in a new direction. I would be in Siberia or prison right now if it had not been for CNN. This is what he said to the generals, because everybody was watching what was happening on the streets of Moscow, the protests, the demonstrations against the coup plotters. And I was ordered, since I was the Air Marshal, the commander of the Air Force, to bomb those people who were protesting on the streets of Moscow. And I refused to order our planes to attack Russian citizens. And one of the reasons is because I knew the whole world was watching, thanks to CNN. And he said to the generals in front of me, he said, if it had not been for CNN, we would have killed a lot of Russians. But I would be I would have done what they told me to do, but I couldn't have lived with myself. So I disobeyed those orders. And fortunately, they didn't send me to Siberia or to prison because you could see what was going on. But CNN played that really unique, amazing role during that crisis. And the Russians appreciated the new Soviet defense minister, people in Russia, and I've seen that happen in I've been with CNN, Shelby said, 32 years. I recently celebrated my 32nd year at CNN. I started on May 8th, 1990 as the Pentagon correspondent. And, I still get up every morning and look forward to going to work because they pay me to be what I would have been even if I had become a doctor or a lawyer or anything else, an equity guy or whatever. I'm a news junkie, and it's a blessing to be able to make a living doing something you love doing and would be doing no matter what in any case. So I'm so grateful to CNN.
Well,
for all these years.
we're grateful to you, your audience, and you have done CNN and journalism proud, and we appreciate you
And we
very
are grateful
much.
to Shelby for all he has done too.
Here, we gotta do a picture here.
Oh, okay.
Give you this award. Be careful of this. This is a serious hardware.
Very hard.
Yeah.
Very heavy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't be careful.
Can I take it?
Yes, you can take it.
Thank you.
It's yours.
Thank you. And thanks to Keystone for all you're doing. We are all so, so grateful. Thanks so much.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. You got it, pal.
Shelby, no, you're with me still. We
Oh,
started this.
all right.
We're going to end this
Okay,
together.
we're going to end it together.
I want to thank everyone who was a part of this evening. Shelby, our superb MC. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Too nice. Too nice.
As Wolf Blitzer just so powerfully articulated, the freedom of the press, you as a caretaker and holding that light, and how it relates to Keystone in our work in terms of bringing forward people whose voices aren't always heard, is powerful. So thank you.
It's a good thing.
It is a good thing. So thank you. I want to recognize the end of another terrific awards dinner evening. Congratulate our awardees, Wolf Blitzer, as we mentioned. Scott Gottlieb, who was a former Keystone board member. He's who I listened to during the pandemic. He's brilliant. And Art Kaplan, our trustee, that was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much. Diane Regas, your work is incredibly important. We're so grateful to be affiliated with what you're trying to do. Frederick Smith, the work around just the innovation and brilliance and the work around the pandemic, and recently with distributing baby formula, and FedEx steps up when it's most needed. So awesome to have that here tonight. Senator Debbie Stabenow is representative of our long affiliation with Michigan. One of our former chairs was Dave Bazzelli from Dow. Mike Witt is here, and now we have Carrie Houtman.
Wolverines all around.
Wolverines all around. We gave the award in 2020 to John Dingle, and we have a lot of his alumni as a part of a Keystone board and energy board. And boy, I followed him on Twitter. What? Whoa. What an amazing person. So I landed in Saginaw with 6 inches of washboarded ice. I didn't know you could land a plane like that. So awesome that we have Michigan in the house. And on behalf of Keystone, thank you for your inspiring vision, for supporting our work, for recognizing, we've stole the line about collaboration moves at the speed of trust, but one of our other staff members, Julie Shapiro, mentioned that Keystone, what we do is we recognize the intersection of politics against policy, which has become more and more evident, frankly, in these last few years. And we move people from conflict to the ability to collaborate. And I tell our staff all the time that we've never been more important in doing that work.
And I commend you for stealing the slogan. I think it was William Faulkner who said, "Amateurs borrow, professionals steal."
I
Congratulations.
am a happy.
Yeah.
Hey, I was in
You're a
politics
pro.
once. Stealing is absolutely appropriate.
Well, I'll pass it on. There's a Washington rule. The first time you say, as Christine Scandal Scanlon wonderfully said to me, the second time, a smart friend of mine said to me, and the third time, it's my phrase. Okay, so there you go. So the three-step rule to you too can be a wise man and woman.
You're such a wise person and mentor to
Wise
myself.
wise ass, I think is the
all
phrase
of
you're
that, all of that.
searching
We share
for.
that. We
Yeah,
share that.
so.
Again, especially our presenting sponsors, I want to extend a thank you to Denton's Dow, FedEx, and the Huntington Bankshires Fund. And of course, all of you who have come together tonight for our reunion, our
It is.
post-COVID, as we ignore COVID,
Here we are.
reunion.
With Scott Gottlieb right here and Arthur Kaplan, holy
I think we
smokes.
can move forward from here. But Keystone's work, as I shared, has never been more important. Bridging these divides is not impossible, but it's challenging. I believe more of our country is united than we see. And Keystone's work reflects those points of intersection, the nexus around where policy and politics intersect in a productive conversation moving forward. It's based in trust, it's based in an understanding and recognition of people's interests, and we believe sincerely that our work helps to better and improve our society, and the impacts of that will result in lasting generations, and that's why we do what we do.
And nobody does it better than this woman. And I'd like one last round of applause for keeping it on the road during COVID. Holy smoke. Makes me proud to know you.
All right.
Thanks.
Much love to Shelby, all of you for being here with us, our Keystone family. You come in, you don't ever get to leave. We recognize that. We'll see you next year. It's our 30th anniversary. So this will be a bigger, better, more fabulous experience. And thank you. Travel safe. Be well. Take care of each other. Thank you.